Today's video is about creative techniques for men's portraits. I'm going to show you how to use color, shutter drag, as well as specialty modifiers for eye-catching results. Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here. When it comes to creative photography, I found that a lot of time the ladies get all of the love and attention. I mean, obviously, when you're photographing female models and subjects, you get to do unusual hair and makeup and wardrobe and lighting, and the guys, sometimes they don't get enough of that creative flair. So today what I want to do is I want to show you 3 different approaches to creative lighting that I use for male portraits. And by the way, just because something's a portrait doesn't mean it has to fall into a certain category. There's so many different creative approaches. Now, obviously, there are endless different combinations of creative lighting. And today what I actually want to show you is we're going to take 4 lights and make subtle tweaks to this setup for dramatically different results. So here's the broad overview. We're going to have a main light, a fill light, and 2 rim lights. But what we're going to do is first we're going to start by adding creative color, color theory, and gels to make an eye-catching result. Then what we're going to do is a creative in-camera technique called shutter drag to add a little bit of motion and energy to the shots. And then we're going to end our setups using a specialty modifier and other creative in-camera techniques using a smoke ninja. Now, obviously, these are not the only 3 creative lighting approaches for photographing men, but what I'm hoping to do is get you inspired. You can take little pieces from each of these setups, mix and match them, and come up with your own. And then you'll see that you don't need to rely on the glitz and glam of photographing women to make something that is truly eye-catching. So let's start off by talking a little bit about the gear we're going to be using. I'm going to be using Profoto strobes, primarily the Profoto D2s and Pro D3s, and then a variety of Profoto modifiers. We're going to mix and match, and you'll see how that really changes the look and end results. And I'm also going to be using a Nanlite Pavo tube. This is an RGB LED light that I can dial into any hue. By mixing strobes and continuous light, that's going to open up some creative possibilities that would not be possible by only using strobes. Okay, now for my camera and lens, I'm going to use my go-to setup. I use the Canon R5 Mark II and the RF 24-105 2.8 lens. This is a fantastically versatile lens, so I can shoot everything from full length to mid-length to close-up shots. And you'll see that today I'm doing portraiture, so I'll be photographing primarily head and shoulders, but for some of the shots, I'm going to get real close, real tight and intimate. And when I do that, the 24-105 at 105 is going to be just the right focal length. All right, so we have taken a look at the gear. Let's jump over into the first of our creative setups. Our first setup is all about color, and I'm going to be using colorful gels. But when I do so, when I'm using many different colors in a frame, I like to use color theory and color harmonies to help me make my color choices. Now, one of my favorite tools is color.adobe.com. This is a free interactive color wheel, and on it you can cycle through different color harmonies. Color harmonies are how colors play well together, and you've probably heard of ones like complementary colors, or monochromatic, even analogous. But today what I'm going to do is I am going to select a little bit more of an unusual color harmony called triadic. Now, triadic colors are 3 colors that are equally spaced on the color wheel. And because of that, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of contrast. In fact, this is often used when creating images or visuals for children because there is so much to look at and engage with. Now, the most common triadic color scheme is our red, blue, and yellow color scheme. So what happens if we tweak and just shift the colors on the color wheel just a little bit? So instead of a red, yellow, and blue, we are now going to have a teal, a magenta, and then lastly, a yellow-orange. So it's going to be a really beautiful, energetic color scheme. All right, so with that, let's take a look. We're going to begin with our first light. Now the first light over on the left-hand side is a bare strobe, but we'll begin with our first gel. On it is teal. Now this teal is going to light my subject as well as the background. And now the reason I've chosen a bare strobe, no modifier, is because that hard light is going to give us this beautiful, almost metallic texture to the skin. So let's see what our first light looks like. All right, so you can see right now I have a monochromatic teal image, but I want to create some contrast. I want to separate the subject out from the background. And so that's where we're going to introduce our next 2 lights, which are rim lights. On both sides of the frame, you can see I have a 1 by 4 foot strip softbox. Additionally, you'll see that I have a grid on that softbox. Now, the reason I've chosen a grid is I want to prevent the light from spilling around the space, because the more the colors mix, it might start to shift the hues. And I want to be specific to my color theory and my color harmony. So we're going to turn on those two lights, but you'll notice that they will appear yellow-orange because we've actually added the gel inside the modifier. Now, when I attach gels inside of a softbox, we're using gaffer's tape. And with that gaff tape, we're not putting it right up against the strobe, but we give it just a little space to breathe so that we don't end up melting our gels. Okay, so let's add our two rim lights. All right, that looks beautiful. And you see how that color contrasts him from the background. Now, if I only had 3 lights, I love this. I think it looks beautiful. But my whole goal here was to try an unusual color theory, and that is going to be adding our final strobe over here to the right-hand side with a magenta gel. Now, there is one thing in addition. I have added a grid. Now, if you look, what the grid is doing is it is concentrating the light. I don't want it to spread out everywhere, because if it does, it's actually going to start to cancel out some of the color in the background and on his face. So this grid is going to allow me to focus just on the right-hand side of the frame. So now is our 4th and final light. All right, so now what you'll see is you see that beautiful magenta color on the right-hand side of the face. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to try this color harmony is because I shoot gels all the time, and I have shot it all. I have done every version of monochromatic and analogous and complementary, so I wanted to try something new. And that's why the color wheel is so helpful, because it is your jumping off point. It's your place for inspiration. Of course, you can use the digital one that I recommended, but I really like having a physical color wheel in my hand. In the moment, it allows me to hold it up and just get inspired. So now that I have an inspiring subject and inspiring light, let's get an inspiring shot. Okay, so there you have it. Beautiful images, all about color, a different and unique way to approach men's portraiture with a little bit of creative flair. So speaking of creative flair, we're gonna move on to our next setup, which involves a technique called shutter drag. For our next setup, I am going to change just a couple of variables. A lot of things are going to stay the same, but the small changes I make will make a huge difference to the final result. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna swap out one modifier, some gels, and one of the lights. So in the end, I'm still going to be working with 4 lights, but we're kind of remix it a little bit. All right, so let's actually begin with our main light. In the previous setup, I was using a bare strobe with a gel. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a beauty dish with a grid. This is going to be a little bit softer, a little bit more flattering quality of light, and I have no gel on there at all, so this will be our neutral light in the scene. But very importantly, by adding a grid, we're controlling where the light hits. Previously, in the last setup, when we had a bare strobe, the light hit the subject and the background. Now, I want to restrict the light. So by adding a grid, we're basically just illuminating his face and shoulders, while the background will fall to shadow. So we're going to begin there with our first light. So this shot definitely doesn't look like anything so far. He's just basically a floating head amongst a sea of darkness. So I need to figure out how I want to separate the subject out from the background. Well, guess what? I'm gonna use the same tools as before. We're gonna use those same strip softboxes. The same purpose is that they're going to give him depth and dimension, separate him out. Now, the difference, they're still 1x4 foot strips. They're still gridded, but we've swapped the gels. The gels I now am using are blue. So we're actually going to switch our color theme altogether. The color harmony in the previous setup was triadic. Now we're going to go for monochromatic, which means the hues in this image are all going to be the same. We're going to have blue rim lights and a blue fill, which you'll see in a moment. So we have our beauty dish grid as the neutral main light, then our 1x4 foot strip softboxes as our blue rims. All right, so now you'll see those beautiful highlights on the jawline and the side of his face and body. All right, this takes us to our last light. This is the one that we swapped out. So if you recall, in the previous shot, I was using a bare strobe with a grid and our magenta gel. But this is where our special effect is going to take place. In this setup, we're going to be using a continuous light for our 4th light. Now, the light that I'm using here is a Nanlite Pavo tube. It is the 2-foot tube, and I'm going to set it to blue to match our monochromatic scheme. Now, what's nice about this is when you mix strobes and continuous light, that's when you have the opportunity to get pretty creative. So let me turn it on and show you where we're beginning. So if you compare this shot to the previous, you will see hardly any difference. And that's because right now my camera settings are intended for the studio strobes. I'm shooting at 1/200th of a second, f11 ISO 400. That gets rid of ambient light. But what I want to do is actually want to get the continuous light to show up. And so for this technique, I need to do something called dragging the shutter. I'm going to go from 1/200th of a second all the way down, slower and slower and slower, to 1/15th of a second, 1/10th of a second, something like that. And with that slower shutter speed, the light is going to register. This shot looks completely different. Now you can see a lot of beautiful blue in the shadow side of the face as well as on the background. That is all from the continuous light over here on the right-hand side of the frame. But I don't have my special effect, my technique yet that's going to make this wow. And that is when I introduce moving my camera. Now, my camera movement can be a little bit of a zoom or a little bit of a wiggle. I could even have my subject move, but what that's going to do is create streaks of light. Now, in the description below, I've actually linked to a variety of other videos that cover this topic called shutter drag or dragging the shutter. And what it does is it gives a sense of energy and movement and just like a little creative flair to your shots. So let me show you what it looks like when I introduce a little camera movement. So now you can see what I'm talking about. As I move my camera, the blue continuous light on the right-hand side actually shows up as this beautiful streak. Now, again, I recommended you check out the links in the description for a little bit more about this technique, but one more tip I want to give you is when you do this, you need to turn off all ambient light. And so ambient light would be your overhead lights, you want to close your curtains, anything like that. However, there's one more thing in here that might cause a little bit of a problem. That's going to be my modeling lights, because here's how it works. Your strobes, they flash and they freeze your subject in place. And then during the long exposure, any continuous light shows up. But in this case, the modeling lights will actually stay on. And so if I intend for my subject to be sharp with just a little bit of blur, that modeling light might mess up my plans. So my recommendation is turn off all the lights in the scene, including the modeling lights, and then move forward. In this case, I actually think the subject still looks pretty sharp, pretty in focus, but when I shoot this for real, I'm gonna turn off all continuous light. Okay, now, I'm going to move ahead and I'm going to get this shot. The types of things I'm doing is moving my camera quickly. I'm zooming my camera. I'm stepping towards my subject. Each one is going to give me a slightly different result. This is where art and science meet. All right, so with that, let me turn off my modeling light. These images have a lot of life and energy and movement to them, all because of the shutter drag technique. So in our first setup, it was all about color. In our second setup, all about movement. So now let's take a look at our creative techniques for our final portrait setup. For our last creative men's portrait, what we're going to do is, guess what? Keep the same number of lights and we're going to make small tweaks for a dramatic difference. So I'm going to build these in step by step. The most creative element of this shot is the fact that we're going to be using a specialty modifier on our main light. We're going to be using the Westcott Optical Spot. This really is my favorite modifier. If you look at my portfolio, I use it everywhere. Now, how this modifier works, it's got a lens on the front. You can use a 150, which is great for close-ups, and that's what we're using here, or a 50mm lens that is great for wider full-length shots or lighting a background. So what we've done is we've narrowed the shutters of this modifier to create just a tight slice of light on the face. And then you can actually sharpen the lens so that it'll be a more defined edge, or you can soften it to be a little bit more diffused. This gives you an insane amount of control, and this is definitely one of my favorite modifiers overall, but it's a go-to for my creative men's portraiture. So we're gonna start with that main light. That really is the big difference in this setup. All right, let's take a test. Okay, so I just told you that this is one of my favorite lighting modifiers, but in this particular shot, it's not very much on its own, but that's kind of the point, is that you can restrict your main light. It allows you to add a lot of other lights with specific jobs and purposes without letting the main light overtake the entire scene. So far it's just a strip down the middle. Now, guess what we're gonna do? just like the other shots, we are adding our 2 rim lights into the scene. It's the same 1x4 foot strips, the same grids. And in this instance, we're not going to be using any gels, but you will notice one slight change. They're at a slightly higher angle. And by being at a slightly higher angle, they'll light a little bit more of the top of the head and hair. All right, so we're gonna add in light number 2 and 3. Now, obviously, these rim lights are really important for separation, but you'll also notice that the higher angle helps light the top of the shoulders, which is great to separate him out from the background. So it's a low-key image, but I still have some detail and depth. All right, so let's take a look at our 4th and final light. Now, in the very first shot, we used a grid with a magenta gel, and that was adding fill of magenta to the shadows. For our second shot, we used a pavo tube paired with shutter drag to give this blue streak of light. And for our final shot, we are back to a strobe, but our modifier is a beauty dish with a grid. Now, the reason we have chosen this is a beauty dish with a grid is going to be a beautiful fill light that is controlled. So I don't have to worry about the light spreading and hitting the background. But in this, I have added a gel. And what that's going to do is, because there's so many shadows on the face, wherever those shadows are, when I add a gel to the fill, it's going to add just a kiss of color there. So we've got a beauty dish with a grid and a teal gel. This is going to add that color just around the face, make it look a little bit more mysterious. So let's take a look at the 4th and final light. So you can see that this gets very moody and mysterious. And unlike the first shot that was all about color, this is more about transforming the mood. Remember, in the first shot, our main light had a teal gel on it. Bare bulb, light spreads everywhere. It lights the subject and the background. Here, the beauty dish in the grid makes that color much more restricted. Okay, so this looks great, but the whole point of this is creative setups. And so we're going to introduce one more creative element to the scene. This is a tool that I've been using all the time recently. It is a handheld, portable, battery-operated smoke machine. It is gorgeous. I use it all the time. It is the Smoke Ninja Pro. And what's great about this is it has a special setting on it for this liquid ice, this liquid fog that can just cling to the skin. So we're going to add this dry or liquid ice effect. Now, because we have it backlit, it's going to kind of glow. You'll really pop that smoke out. Thank you, Stephen. So you can see how it adds a sense of atmosphere to the scene. Now, what I want to make sure is I don't necessarily need this for all the shots, but I want to make sure that it doesn't overpower the subject. So what I might do is some tight shots where the smoke kind of just wraps around the face. I think that could make some really emotive and interesting compositions. Okay, so with that, I'm going to get the shot. All right, so what makes this creative men's portrait different than the rest? Our main light with the optical spot, and then the Smoke Ninja Pro for a little bit of atmosphere. In this video, I cover 3 creative lighting setups, but why stop there? How about 35 more? Check out my brand new Creative Lighting Guide 3, and in it, I have behind the scenes photos, diagrams, camera settings, everything you need to know to create these amazing shots. Plus, I cover brand new techniques like projectors, light painting, lasers, shutter drag, and so much more. So there you have it. Each one of these shots brings something different and creative to the table. One of them is just about playing with color. And then our next shot is all about movement and energy, and it feels mysterious. And then finally, we end with a specialty modifier that introduces some colored light. But what you'll notice is that fundamentally our setup stayed the same. Throughout all of these setups, we use those 2 rim lights. We use 1x4 foot strip softboxes with grids. And in some of the setups, we use gels, and others we use just the regular white light. And then for all 4 setups, we had a main and a fill, but what changed between those was the modifiers, gel use, and then sometimes a little bit of continuous light. So we fundamentally had the same footprint of light, but just little tweaks, little adjustments. Every shot looks completely different. So hopefully from all of these setups, you've gotten just a little bit of creativity and inspiration, whether it's use of color or use of shutter drag or mixing and matching all of these techniques together. So if you want to see the gear I use to make these eye-catching men's portraits, be sure to check out the links in the description below. And if you want to learn more about creative lighting, I have so many lighting guides and tutorials that give you every detail you need to create literally hundreds of different setups. And I've linked to that in the description as well. All right, everybody, hope you've enjoyed this. And when you're going to pick up your gear for your own creative portraits, be sure to visit Adorama.com. See you next time, guys.